This section, Mr. Zuckerman, Ms. Terry.
Yeah, sorry. I just went to the restroom. Yeah.
So those are the 3 pages. Ms. Terry.
Hello again, Melinda Terry, Central Valley Flood Control Association. And I guess I'll just start off by saying it's been clear through the plan and this chapter in particular that I think we all agree that the levees are the actual infrastructure that's protecting all of the co-equal values that you're required under statute. And we've heard a lot of testimony and had written comments that I think we all agree also that these are really dikes. They're holding back water 24/7. It's not like they're seasonal and only holding back water when we have high water events. And because they have to operate that way, always holding back the water, seepage and the undermining water coming, the risk of water coming underneath is often sometimes greater, if you will, than just the overtopping that can occur, which is what the HMP standard is supposed to take care of. So if you have a district that has levees that is known to have a sandy levee base, and let's say it's only a few inches away from the HMP, but it's having seepage issues. As a district, you have a responsibility, public safety-wise, economics, everything that you're trying to protect behind that levee. You're worried about seepage and fixing and creating berms and widening it to address those issues, not just an overtopping that may occur from high flood events that are, every 8 to 10 years. Again, these are holding these water 24/7, and so that possibility of failure from underneath is your biggest problem. So they have that obligation to really fix that first. Which brings to the issue of the HMP. FEMA and the Corps were very clear, my understanding, and Tom will come after me, and he was here when this was all negotiated. They were very clear that the HMP is not sufficient levee standard, which is why they, in CalFed, they adopted the Delta PL 8499 as Bulletin 19282, and the legislation, therefore, after that said that's the goal we're going towards. One of the big concerns I look at if you're looking at an investment strategy where you're like, okay, as long as you're going towards HMP, but you don't have to justify, but if you want to go to this other level that actually is widening the levees and improving them, because keep in mind the Delta PL 8499 has design criteria that calls for the flatter waterside and landside slopes, inclusion of landside berms as necessary, use of once in 300-year water levels, provision of more freeboard, and additional freeboard for wind-generated waves. And it's really supposed to be site-specific for, again, what's underlying those levees as well. And the concern is, I look at this and think, we're kind of going, first of all, we're going backwards. FEMA has made it clear that that's not a standard that is acceptable. And so they could easily look at a policy like this and go, okay, now the state is reneging on the deal that we made, which is they're going to build towards this PL 8499. So they're reneging on that deal by promoting investing really just in an HMP standard that we made clear is not sufficient. So they could turn around now and say, you know what, you've adopted this policy, we've gone against statute that says you should be building towards this, so we don't have an obligation and we're not interested, frankly, in paying for this. And that's the whole reason we've gotten from DWR, and I think I've heard at discussions here as well, is the reason for the HMP is, we want to make sure to get federal reimbursement if there's a levee failure. That's a laudable goal and what have you, but that has nothing to do with what the risks to those levees are and what the risks to the communities and all the values. If you went to a judge and said, well, we were promoting financing, getting an HMP first, okay, well, what does that have to do with the levee integrity and the seepage issues that might exist?
Ms. Terry, look, the statute said that the council was to recommend to the state of California strategies for their investment policies on risk reduction and levees. And our first policy, our policy one, says that by January 1st, 2015, the council, the Department of Water Resources, Central Valley Flood Board, shall do in collaboration this kind of study, an assessment of existing levee conditions, island by island economic-based risk analysis, ongoing assessment of levee conditions, so on and so forth. And then out of that, make recommendations. And then it says, prior to the completion of these priorities, the interim priorities listed below shall apply to the extent permitted by law, guide discretionary state investment. As I understand your argument, you simply wish us to either not do the study or convert the interim standards into a higher level of protection for existing funding. And explain to me why it makes sense to increase, to essentially support the notion that you can ask for more state money for a higher level of protection, which is not currently the case in these circumstances, and that we should do that before we have done the study and the evaluation needed to determine the state interest in the levy and the appropriate cost-sharing ratios.
Well, because when I look at what the title of this this thing is, prioritization of state investments in Delta levies and risk reduction, because the risk reduction isn't there. That's the point I think we're trying to make, is that a simple overtopping freeboard criteria is not really reducing the risk. And so it's reneging on the deal that we made with the Corps and FEMA, that they said, look, that's not good enough.
The state never made a deal that the state would pay to upgrade all of the levies.
Not to pay.
Well, and this policy is specifically about the state paying. It is not about what the standards are.
Sure.
I will repeat that. It is not about
True.
the standards.
And maybe the best thing to do would be, again, remind folks where we are in the staff report and what it is that we're actually discussing now, which is not the policy about prioritizing levy investments. It's actually the introductory text, which says, and it responds to the concern that you've raised, Ms. Terry, because we all understand that reclamation districts may want to improve levies to standards higher than the state's willing to pay for, or the state can pay for at any given time, and the concern has been expressed that somehow the language in the Delta plan would suggest that they weren't free to do so with their own funds. And so what we're trying to do is be very explicit and include in the narrative of the plan the statement that efforts by landowners, reclamation districts, and other parties to use local resources to upgrade levees beyond the standards that may be funded by the state are encouraged. Right. And they're consistent with the state's goals for reducing Delta flood risks. So in this particular case, what we're saying is, we understand that a district may want to do it. Go for it. Well, and we're going to, in a minute, we're going to talk about the policy that you're concerned about, but this is not the item that we're trying to discuss right now.
Okay, let me rephrase it then, because I do want to be clear. I am arguing that I think the state should be helping to invest in a level that the FEMA and Corps, the state itself in their own historical documents. Imagine going to court and then, we can present all kinds of documentation where DWR itself says that the HMP is not a sufficient standard, that the Delta PL 8499 is what they were headed towards. It's what CalFed said. So we've got all kinds of documents that say that. And yet you're going to choose to not have the state invest in what it's already said is the standard that is the better standard.
Ms. Terry, if you had a legally enforceable law that mandated the state pay all or a significant share of the cost, this would be a moot issue because you'd be suing for non-performance under that law. It is the absence of that law and the attempt to weave together tangential issues and other statements to the point where you say, God, you were really committed kind of backwards and sideways without a law. That's what's going on in my judgment. And I don't mind you saying that, and Mr. Zuckerman's option number 2 says that essentially. It just says this is, the priorities shown in his revision of the table are meant to guide budget and funding allocation strategies. So therefore, discretionary funding programs authorized by the legislature for levies are now expanded so that non-project levies, any levy anywhere in the Delta or the Suisun Marsh, can apply for money, which means that the people currently eligible have a smaller pie that they will get so that people not currently eligible can get a cut. I understand the attractiveness of that. I got the attractiveness. The notion we would do that in advance of doing the study that the legislature asked us to do makes no sense to me.
Well, I think if this were a recommendation and not a policy, maybe that's different too. But you're setting up a policy where, again, it's prioritizing and saying it's no problem to do HMP, but somehow there's a justification to get to the PL 8499, which the state itself has admitted is the better standard to build towards. And again, it seems to me the reimbursement issue may go away if FEMA suddenly says, you're kind of you're going backwards as a state, and you're not even headed towards doing that. I understand what you're saying about the study, but this has been studied to death, and that's what they did during CalFed and had the negotiations that I guess Tom was part of, and came up, with the Corps and FEMA saying, here's where we want you to head towards. And if we're no longer heading towards there as the state as well as the locals, I mean, we consider ourselves partners. We don't want to be left alone to do this. We think under the obligation of the statutes where you're supposed to be, protecting the values, the economics, the life, the safety, seepage is one of those issues that this other standard can help, and I guess that's what we're struggling with is if HMP is just so that we can get reimbursement, how's that really protecting the water conveyance or the people, the property? I'm not understanding that.
Please tell me the statute that pledges the state of California to finance any levee repair everywhere in the Delta of the Suisun Marsh?
It does not say that, and that's not what I'm saying either. I am just saying that we're kind of focusing on the wrong direction of where we want to head and end up. And this is supposed to be a visionary plan of where we want to end up, and I think that's why you were saying where the study maybe comes in. But in the meantime, to not really stick with where we've been, which is that's a standard we need to do because we know we have such problems with water coming from underneath. I'm just not understanding.
Mr. Grindstaff, you had a question.
Yeah. It is true that PL 8499 is better than HMP. It's true that reaching the 100-year standard, the 1 in 100-year fault, is better. In fact, it is true that the federal government, through FEMA, has required for all new development the 100-year standard. In California, the state legislature through SB 5 is required for urban communities they get to the 200-year standard. In no case has anyone said when we set these standards we are therefore obligating ourselves to pay for them. And I think that's where there's this disconnect. We aren't setting a standard. What we are doing, recommending here, is that the state prioritizes spending and first do the things that are most critical. And the staff's view, and I hope the council will concur, is that we should spend money to bring everything up to HMP, and then we have a list of priorities where other funding should be spent. I think there is no place in law, not just for the Delta, but anywhere in the state where the state is or should be obligated to have to spend money to pay to bring levies up unless they actually go through a cost analysis. I mean, for project levies with cities with millions of people, they require that they actually go through
we have
the
those
analysis.
guideline requirements already when we apply for the money.
But there is no current requirement, as I understand it, that says you have to actually do a benefit analysis and figure out what the benefits to the state are and actually make payments based on that. That's what DWR is proposing, what I think we're supporting in this on an interim basis till we can do a more formal analysis. And I think that standard of how you invest the public's money is really an important one. It does not mean that we should not upgrade levees to protect people and property. We should absolutely do that, but we should also be careful with how we spend the state's resources.
I mean, I think we all agree with that, that you want to do that wisely, and I guess that's what we're just trying to figure out is what is the wise choice. And, if you have the obligation to protect co-equal values, then the infrastructure is there, and we know that there's a standard that is better than the other. It's just a little bit hard to understand why that isn't a goal that we're headed towards, understanding that you still have to apply and go through the process to get those monies. It just, the way this reads, it's, like I said, is you don't have to justify at all getting to an HMP standard, So, okay, we could spend a lot of money on that, but what if seepages are real issues and somehow you're not justifying it, and then later it seems like it does open the state up when you say, well, you were focused, on a standard because you wanted to get federal reimbursement when you knew that the underlying material in that levee had seepage issues. Why didn't you, as a state, want to invest in that when you had infrastructure and ag economy, the things in the Delta statute that, you've said you're going to, maintain, enhance, and protect? They're protected by levees.
In fact, we do say that the state may choose to invest in that, but it actually needs to be done based on an assessment of what the benefits to the state are, not just willy-nilly spend the money.
Well, so then I'll move on just for a second, just to then talk about the grids. I guess the levels 1, 2, and 3. Tom wants to interject just on that.